Morning everyone, welcome to our webinar today with Pure Storage on Drive Working from Home Efficiency through VDI. My name's Danielle Chapman, I work in the marketing team here at Bytes, and today I'm joined by Max Brown, who is the Channel Technical Manager at Pure Storage, and Penelope Bridger, who is the Data Center Sales Lead at Bytes. Okay, so I'm now just going to pass over to Pen just to go through the agenda and provide a little bit of an intro.
Perfect, thank you Danielle. Good morning everyone. As Danielle said, I'm Penelope Bridger and I am the Data Center Sales Manager at Bytes. I manage all of the data center and end user compute overlay specialists within the business who are here to support our account directors and support you. I appreciate you all taking the time to join us this morning to discuss Pure. To give you a brief background on our relationship with Pure, Bytes were one of Pure's first partners in EMEA, and we've had a strategic relationship together for the past 7 years that spans all verticals, be it commercial, enterprise, the NHS and public sector. My team are fully certified on all aspects of Pure and are keen to assist you with any and all conversations required when it comes to the technical aspects of these offerings. Today, Max will cover why storage is the key foundation to a better desktop experience, how admins can mitigate any issues with peaks and troughs, how Pure prevents the dreaded tech refresh cycle, and how you can pay per used gigabyte with the latest Pure as a service offering. We'll then go through a questions and answer session with Max, and then I'll finish with an overview of our Bytes Workspace advisory service and answer any questions you may have on that engagement. There is also a PDF flyer available for you to download on the side of this webinar. Please do be as interactive as possible during the session in the questions box. And I'll now hand over to Max to start the session.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Let me just put it in full screen mode. So thanks for your time, everybody. And we'll just cover off virtual desktop infrastructure and why storage is kind of one of the key foundations and why Pure have been so successful in this area. So if you've ever tried to deploy a VDI environment, you'll find there are many challenges that you're going to come across. The main one really being, from what we've seen, is performance, right? You can't deliver someone a worse experience than they currently have. Also, you need to be able to scale. So do you need to scale the compute because of the kind of workloads, or do you need to scale the storage? What about refreshes? What about new technology? How is that going to affect all of your end users that are sitting at their virtual desktops when suddenly you need to update the firmware on the storage, or maybe you need to add capacity, or maybe something fails on the storage? So this is all about getting a better cost of ownership out of this solution. It's definitely improving the performance for the end user, because that's one of the key things. And then simple scalability. So the key thing around any VDI deployment, the users need to be happier, right? It has to be a better experience. In fact, we'd go so far as to say a lot of the deployments we do, we find that customers running VDI on Pure is actually faster than having a local laptop or desktop that has an SSD in it. So why would you consider Pure for VDI? There's a few key reasons, really. So we talk about simple is smart. And what we mean by that is that our technology under the covers is incredibly intelligent, and you could say complex, but to the outside user, it's extremely simple to administer. Think of it in some ways like a Tesla car. There's a huge amount of intelligence inside it, but you just get inside and it literally drives itself. So if you can have a storage environment that you can deploy and manage with pretty much zero storage experience, and in fact, if you're using VMware as your platform, you have full vSphere integration. So to use Pure takes about 20 minutes. That's it. It's very, very simple to learn and administer. The user experience has to be fast all the time. It's about not only being one of the fastest arrays out there, but being consistently fast, right? Having that consistent low latency and high bandwidth, regardless of what's happening in the environment. Cost is always at the forefront of everyone's minds when they're doing this. Now, with something like virtual desktops, there's a lot of duplication because all the images might look the same. We have the best data reduction in the business. Therefore, our physical footprint and therefore our costs should actually reduce in line with your VDI deployment. But also, we have something called Evergreen, which I'll talk about shortly, which in all honesty means that once you buy a Pure array, you'll never have to buy another one to replace the one that you've already got. We ensure that your technology never gets old and you never have to buy a new one and do a data migration. And from a consumption model, there's obviously the traditional CapEx side of things where you buy the array with a certain number of years support, or you can actually consume it via OpEx and actually have the array on a pay per gigabyte model. So a couple of things just to validate this. So you can go to our website and get the latest Gartner Magic Quadrant. This is the one that's called primary storage, and this is kind of a new Magic Quadrant, and you see where up there in the top right, if you went back over the previous 5 years quadrants, they used to do one specifically for all flash arrays. It was called solid state arrays, and we were the top right in all of those for the last 5 years. But now they've combined solid state arrays just into something called primary storage, because all flash arrays have now got, they've now taken more than 51% of the market. There's also another Gartner report called Critical Capabilities. Again, you can get that from our website. And if you look at the page specifically for virtual desktop infrastructure, you can see that we're rated #1, and the Gartner report will tell you their reasons why. So let's start with simplicity. Right? This just needs to be extremely simple to use. You don't want knobs and dials and tuning to worry with. In fact, just to kind of go slightly on a more technical side of things, all the items on the left-hand side of this slide are things that if you've ever dealt with most other vendors' storage technologies, these are things you'd have to think about. What RAID level do you want to actually choose to configure? So then you're looking at, do I want performance or capacity? Never two of them. Now, there are other vendors that do deduplication and compression, but for a lot of those vendors, it's an optional feature, and you have to decide where you want to enable it. And the thing is, generally we found, because it's an extra bolt-on that these vendors have designed, if you enable dedupe for everything, then your performance may suffer. So you're still having trade-offs to think about. And then you can get really into the weeds with things like queue depth, where it's a real kind of limiting technology on some arrays. The way that Pure is designed, either our architecture doesn't require these settings, or we do them automatically and the end user doesn't see it. In fact, that GUI screenshot on the right is what an end user would do within the Pure GUI if they wanted to create a data store or a volume to be used with VDI or for anything. Literally, you have to specify what you want to call that volume or LUN and how big you want it. That's literally it. That is all of the storage decisions you need to make. And in fact, just to go one level further, let's see how this would work within vSphere. So let's say you're deploying VMware Horizon. The VMware administrator would never even have to go into the Pure GUI. It's all done within vSphere. So he would literally right mouse click on an object, and he would see that there's a Pure Storage option. From that Pure Storage option, you would click Create Data Store. It would then ask, what do you want to call the data store and how big do you want it? You would then select which of your Pure arrays to run it on. And if you've only got one, you wouldn't even need to select this bit. And then you click Finish. It is as easy as that. It's literally, what do you want to call the data store and how big do you want it? There are no more storage decisions to make. Nothing about block size, nothing about enabling dedupe or encryption, nothing about RAID sets, etc. Just literally, what do you want to call it and how big? Also, from a data reduction perspective, what Pure does is we do deduplication and we do compression. These features are permanently turned on. You cannot turn them off, you cannot tune them, you cannot alter them. The array will self-adjust to the workloads that are coming in, so you don't have to make any decisions about this. Even with these features permanently turned on, and encryption, data rest encryption is also permanently turned on, this does not affect performance. This is the way the array has been architected from day one. So, there are some arrays that do dedupe, some that do compression. If you don't do both, you're not going to get the savings you need. Typically in a VDI environment, we see everything from around 8:1 up to 20:1, depending on how you've actually deployed your VDI environment, whether you've got linked, clones, or persistent. Also, our deduplication and compression is global. It's across the entire array. So it doesn't matter how many volumes you have, it doesn't affect the data reduction ratio. So again, this makes the design very easy. You don't have to think about, well, I need to have larger volumes and just a few of them, or hundreds of small ones. You manage your environment the way that you see fit. The array will work with whatever you design at the application layer. And again, simplicity is not simple if you can't see it. So yes, you can see lots of statistics about what the Pure Storage array is doing itself, but we can also tie this into your VMware environment and actually track all the way through from the array to the volume down to the virtual disk. So doing this means you can correlate problems quite easily. You can also quite easily see which VMs are running on which hosts. If there's any latency issues, you can also track, you know, from a VMware, from a virtual machine perspective, which ones have got high CPU or memory utilization, then track that back to the array to see where the problem might be. This VM analytics and this whole Pure One interface, this is free. Every customer gets this. So from a scalability perspective, it is very simple. I mean, rough and tough, these are some numbers that we, we've done some testing with. So our smallest array, the X10, goes up to about 1,500 users. The X70 goes up to 9,000. We also have an array called an X90, which we're currently still doing testing on, and we expect that to go up to close to 15,000 seats. Now, in terms of customers' requirements, they do change over time. And as we said, growth is not always predictable. So could it be that actually I've got enough capacity, but a lot of my virtual desktops are doing GPU-based or CAD type work, and actually we need more performance out of the array. We need more IOPS because we have some really heavy users. Or maybe we just need to add more capacity. Or it could be that we've just released a new version of Purity, which is the code that runs on the array, and that new feature, the customer wants to take advantage of it. It could be something to do with cloud integration. It could be to do with replication. But what you might need to do is upgrade the code on the array. So the key design feature of Pure, and we've had this from day one, is to have these things called upgradable controllers. So the controllers are the key to any storage infrastructure. The controllers are the piece of hardware that runs the intelligent software, that does all the dedupe, the compression, the RAID, the IO processing. They are the engines behind this. Now, if you need to go from one type of storage of Pure array to the next, you're basically just swapping out the controllers within that chassis you can see in the picture in the middle of this slide. And swapping those controllers is a non-disruptive operation. In fact, if you look at the flash that we use, you can see there's three objects for the picture of the flash. And the one on the left is an SSD. We no longer use SSDs. So SSDs were a technology that served a purpose at the time, but right now they don't. The problem with an SSD, it has a lot of inbuilt technology, microprocessors, little bits of software, firmware that we as a Pure array do not need. So now the picture at the top, the one that has kind of the orange heatsink on, our flash modules, it's just the raw flash chips that we use. We put them in a 2.5-inch drive caddy, and then all of the intelligence is done within the controller layer. But because we do everything in software, in our controllers, we can chop and change the flash as and when necessary. We've gone from MLC to TLC. We've got QLC coming out shortly. We've got NVMe-based technology. We've even got storage class memory. But the key thing about Pure, in terms of the upgrades, is that whatever it is that you need to upgrade, it's done with no downtime, but more importantly, it's done with no performance loss, and absolutely there is never any data migration. And what you get with Pure in this kind of evergreen model, it's what we call a subscription to innovation. Since 2012, when we had our very first array, up to 2020, our whole design architecture decision from day one was that everything will be a non-disruptive upgrade. So if a customer is going from, you can see in 2012 we had the FA300, then we launched the FA400, then we had the Flash Array M in 2015, which was a fundamental architecture design kind of refresh. But if a customer had the FA400 in 2014 and then went to a Flash Array M in 2015, this again was a truly non-disruptive upgrade. So at no point during the life of a Pure array would a customer ever have to do a data migration to a new Pure array, because we effectively make your old array become new as part of our evergreen. All of these features and all of these kind of new hardware refreshes, these are included with your evergreen subscription. So once you've bought the Pure array, throughout the constant life cycle, you get all of the new hardware, you get all of the new features included. And in fact, if we look at customers that are now coming up for their 3-year refresh on their Pure array, it's likely that the array they bought 3 or so years ago is possibly at the tail end of when we were selling the Flash Array M, and this was the Flash Array M R2. So now at no cost, because this is included in their support, or what we call the evergreen subscription, they will now get their controllers upgraded to the Flash Array X R3, which means they're going to get some pretty good performance improvements. They're going to get access to the latest technology, and it's cost them no money. It's just included. In some ways, it's slightly similar to your mobile phone contract. Every 2 years, you get new hardware as part of your contract. It's very similar to the way we do things. A customer will never need to buy a new Pure array to replace an old one, because the old one actually becomes new every 3 years. In terms of doing upgrades though, throughout the life cycle of your arrays, you may want to see how your array is going to perform over time. So we can do predictions using a lot of machine learning and deep learning with all the technologies that we have. So we can predict what your array might do over the next 3 months, 6 months, whatever you choose. We can look at what's going to happen on the performance side. We can look at what's happening on the capacity, but then you can do some modeling. So in this example, the customer's added a 45 terabyte data pack, and you can kind of slightly see in the top right where it says capacity, it's got two kind of lines, one pink one and one dotted one. So one is showing what happens if you do nothing. One is showing what would happen in the next 6 months if you bought that data pack. From a workload simulation perspective, perhaps this is more relevant to a VDI environment. You might be running 1,000 virtual desktops and say, what would happen to the array if I added another 200 desktops, another 500? What happens if I doubled it to 2,000 virtual desktops? With this, you would select the volumes that relate to your VDI infrastructure, and then you can click the scale button and say scale by a factor of X. You know, it might be 1.2, 1.5, or scale by 2, and it will show you what would happen to the performance and the capacity on that array. So then you'd know that if you were to expand to, let's say, 1,500 virtual desktops, you're going to run out of capacity in 2 months, in which case you can then start to plan ahead and you can start to do some modeling. So the simulation tool and the predictive analytics is extremely beneficial for all of our customers. We also need to think about how the data is protected. So within the physical array itself, everything is fully highly available, everything's redundant, everything is hot swappable. So at any point in time, it might be that you need to swap a controller. Perhaps it failed, right? It's very, very rare, but you know, things do occasionally fail. When we swap a controller out, it has no impact on performance. This is because the arrays are designed, the controllers are designed as high availability. And again, probably discussion for another time. But in terms of swapping the controllers, that's done online with no interruption to I/O, no impact on the end users. From a drive perspective, we can survive concurrent dual drive failures. If you do have drives fail, then again, the impact on performance is negligible, and rebuilds usually take minutes. They definitely take less than an hour. What we are delivering is consistent latency, consistent performance. So if you are upgrading the code on the array, if you are swapping the controllers, if you were to have some kind of hardware failure, performance stays the same. We can also apply some workload consistency. So we have an always-on quality of service that always runs, that makes sure that there's no noisy neighbors or one workload that's getting really noisy and affecting everybody else on the array. We could spot that and throttle it back. Or you may specifically want to apply some limits on some certain volumes or certain tenants within the array. But then going further than protection within the array, what about protecting the array itself? So the data on the array. We can do local snapshots, which are very useful for point-in-time recovery. You could also use this as a way to mitigate against ransomware, or you might want to use these snapshots to spin up test and dev environments very quickly. But then how do you protect against whole array or site failure? We can then get a second array and we can cluster them together, and we have a technology called Active Cluster, which does metropolitan clustering and synchronous replication. This feature called Active Cluster is free. It's included. Unlike many other vendors that would charge a lot of money for it, require extra hardware, you just need 2 arrays on the latest code, and that functionality is now included. And it takes about 25 minutes to set up, compared to some of the multi-day exercises I've seen from other vendors. Now, this only works if you have a low latency, high-speed link. If you don't have that, or you wanted to replicate on a global scale, then we can do asynchronous snapshot-based replication, where you asynchronously replicate data on a periodic schedule to another Pure array anywhere on the planet. We also have the ability to take these point-in-time snapshots and send them to third-party devices. So you could take multiple snapshots, and instead of them living on the Pure array, you could send them to things like a Pure FlashBlade. You could send them to any NFS device. So whether it's a Linux server or any storage appliance that supports NFS, we could send the snapshots there. We can also send them to Amazon S3. We can send them to Microsoft Azure Blob. And at the start of next year, we'll be able to send them to Google Cloud. From a reverse perspective, looking at the backup vendors. So the backup vendors, they can actually integrate with Pure, and they can talk to us and actually instruct us to take snapshots, which they could then orchestrate, backup, replicate, etc. So performance. which is, again, as I mentioned earlier, this is one of the key aspects of VDI. Your performance has to be good. And now these are some numbers that we run a few years back. But if you look at the performance in terms of booting 100 desktops in less than a minute, doing a storage vMotion in 5 seconds, you know, if we compare this to a disk-based VDI, now, to be honest, I don't think many people would consider doing a disk-based VDI solution today because it just is way too painful to do. But in terms of the performance on Pure, this is what we see consistently, and this is why we've been so successful. And there are many things that can trip up a VDI deployment. So sometimes it's the simple things like a boot storm. Now, I know you can kind of stagger your boot storms, you can schedule them to happen, but when machines are booting, that can have a real impact on I/O. What's more likely is perhaps not the boot storm, is the login storm. If all your users are coming into your environment and they're logging on roughly, you know, between 8:30 and 10 a.m., then you could get a huge login storm. The way that Pure is designed, the way the I/O scheduling is designed, and a lot of other clever technologies within the controllers means that you will always maintain this sub-millisecond performance. So it doesn't matter whether you've got login storms or whether you're suddenly doing a huge virus scan or whether you're having to do maintenance and patch deployment, your users will experience a really good level of performance all of the time. In fact, sometimes it feels like that user is the only person on the array because of the consistent performance that they would get throughout the life of their virtual desktop. Now, because of this kind of performance density that we've got and the way that our data reduction works, sometimes users, end users feel that they have to decide, do they want to do persistent desktops or non-persistent desktops? Sometimes they want to do persistent because that means it stays on the storage. It doesn't have to be booted up, but also it could mean it consumes more space if you don't have data reduction techniques. So 140 gig persistent desktops consumes 100 times 40 gigs worth of space. However, on Pure, because of our data reduction, whether you're doing persistent or non-persistent, makes no difference to performance. It makes no difference to the capacity either because of our data reduction. So what you can do is you decide whether you want persistent or non-persistent desktops based on your end user's requirements, not based on storage requirements. You should never let your storage dictate how you design your application, because that's pretty much a tail, an example of the tail wagging the dog, to put it in a phrase. But also, because of the performance you get out of Pure, it's absolutely fine to put other workloads on that same array. So you might be running VDI with, let's say, a 4K block design, but also you could then put on a 32K Oracle Read environment, a 16K Microsoft SQL or 16K VMware environment. You can be putting many different workloads with varying different characteristics on the same Pure array, and that array will just keep running until literally it runs out of performance. And just to give you an idea, our smallest array, the X10, can do easily 100,000 IOPS. So what we found in the early days of Pure, customers would deploy VDI because they saw that it was an easy route onto an all-flash array. And then they noticed that their VDI array, which they were running, which Pure was, had better latency, had lower latency and better IOPS than their production billing systems, which then made them think, why are we having virtual desktops with better performance than our critical billing systems? And then they started to migrate their applications over to Pure. But now, we find most people deploying their tier 1 critical infrastructures straight onto Pure, and then VDI might come a bit later. But again, the whole point is, do not buy storage for VDI and then buy separate storage for a different environment. Have one storage infrastructure that can safely support everything, and that's exactly what Pure does. We will even put some guarantees behind this. So when we talk about data reduction, obviously the better the data reduction, the less physical capacity you need to purchase. If for any reason we guaranteed that you would get 8-to-1 data reduction, and for some reason you got 6-to-1, which meant you don't have as much capacity as you thought, we will give you free capacity. So we will legally underwrite the data reduction that we say you will get. So you tell us how much effective capacity you need, we will guarantee it. So we will size it and we will guarantee it. Another way of procuring this, so we do something called Pure as a Service. And again, this is not direct with Pure, this is all through partners. But this means that you can now consume this on a per gigabyte basis. The way that this works is you basically pay per gigabyte for the data that your applications actually use. So this is all about host written data. The amount of data that you write to the array is what you would be charged. And at the minute, we have it as a minimum 50 terabyte commitment over 12 months. I know all vendors are looking at some kind of financing or leasing models. This is not a finance, this is not a lease, this is a true OPEX only subscription model, but you would still be using pure hardware, but you only pay for the data that your applications actually use. We would manage the hardware in terms of making sure you have enough performance and enough capacity, but in terms of actually designing your VMware data stores or your VDI environment, that again would be down to you. And as always, it's 100% non-disruptive. So just to go to the final slide, kind of getting back to where we started from to summarize. So simple is smart. This is key. The pure storage flash array environment is one of the easiest. In fact, I'd say it's the easiest to use, as I've experienced many storage arrays in my lifetime. But you need virtually no experience. As long as the person that's looking after Pure knows what a gigabyte and a terabyte is and knows what your VMware or your Citrix environment is, then they'll find this extremely easy to deploy. In fact, if they're using vSphere, they don't even have to touch the Pure GUI. They just need to know, what do I want to call my data store and how big do I want it? And we have full vVols integration as well. So again, if they wanted to go down the vVols route, fully supported, which makes it even easier. From a user experience perspective, we said that performance is absolutely key, and we will provide that consistent performance 24/7, regardless of logon storms, boot storms, antivirus scans, etc. Cost perspective, data reduction. We get the best data reduction compared to any vendor in the market. We will happily prove that in a proof of concept, or I can go through the algorithm and show you exactly how we do it, and you would then see that it is better. But also the most important bit, and this is one of the biggest selling points from Pure, is this concept of evergreen, which means you never ever have to replace that array. If you look at your storage environment today, I bet the storage array that you're running today isn't the same when you had 5 years ago, and you probably at some point have had to do a data migration to a brand new array, which brings with itself cost, business risk, etc. I'm sure you've been there. The tech refresh is not something that customers enjoy. In fact, it's a pain, and it's also, a lot of people said, let's just go to the cloud. This way, you're kind of getting your own private cloud-like experience with Pure Storage. And lastly, the flexible consumption model. So traditional CapEx, that's fine, buy the array with X amount of years of support, and every 3 years we swap the controllers for the latest ones, so you're always ahead of the technology curve. Or you consume it via a Pure as a service, as an OPEX model, with a very small 12-month commitment. So with that, thanks for your time, and I'll hand back to Pen at Bytes.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Max. So I just want to go through with you an offering that Bytes have around a modern workspace advisory service. So the idea of this service is to ensure that you have the right workspace strategy to balance your company's performance and security needs with your end user demands for new apps, consumer devices, and easier access. With the modern workspace changing so fast, the idea of locking down EUC to specific tools is being challenged. And today's workforce requires greater mobility and collaboration. And where do you draw the line with unmanaged apps, bring your own device and access? So our free of charge modern workspace advisory service breaks down into 3 areas, where we go through discover and assess, where we explore the capabilities and limits of your EUC environment, including your platforms and workspace, the apps, the data, and your mobility management. We better understand your users' profiles and behaviors, and we gather and analyze that user data on compute and app usage. We then go into the next phase of envision and validate, where we assess the implication of your VDI, WVD, bring your own device, Windows migrations, app delivery, and centralized management. And what we do is offer a tailored report with recommendations for the right modern workspace across the EUC stack to meet your long-term requirements for efficiency, mobility, and agility. What we can then do is offer delivery and adopt services, so we can proof of concept, user experience days, technology showcases to get buy-in from across your business and confirm your chosen EUC path. We provide a variety of services to support organisations once they get to the operational state. The idea of this free of charge advisory service is to help you to move forward with confidence in that strategy. So if you think that's something you might be interested in, my details will be sent over after the webinar. You can also reach out to your data centre representative within the business or your account director within Bytes. Does anybody have any questions for Max and I on anything you've heard today?
Okay, so we've actually had a couple come through, so I'm just going to crack straight on with those. By the way, everyone, if you did want to submit any questions, you can just do that under the GoToWebinar panel. So what is the smallest environment that will be suitable for Pure?
Okay, yeah, so one of the things on the slide, it kind of mentioned, you know, the amount of desktops per array. So the X10 is our smallest array. That will hold roughly up to 1,500 desktops, but from a starting point, I would say roughly around 300 seats. Anything below 300 seats, and I'll be perfectly honest with you, we're probably not going to be the right fit for that kind of environment. So 300 seats upwards, but all the way through to like 15,000.
Brilliant, thank you, Max. And can you explain, sorry, your controller upgrades every 3 years?
Yeah, sure. So the way that this works is the kind of gets slightly more technical. So the Pure Array, it has 2 controllers in it, which from a host perspective, in terms of connectivity in your SAN, look active. But the way that we work actually internally, the controllers are processing the IO in an active passive manner. So one controller is actually doing all of the hard work, and even that one controller can do up to 100,000 IOPS, 1,500 desktops. The other controller is kind of sitting in a standby mode. So this means that at the end of year 3, when we say, right, you know, you've hit your 3-year mark, you're running a Flash Array M from 2017. We're now going to upgrade the controllers to Flash Array X. We literally pull out the standby controller and put a new one in. So at that point, you're running one controller that's active, and it's the M from 2017. The standby controller is now the Flash Array X controller from 2020. We would then remove the primary controller, which is the old one. That workload would then instantly fail over and be running on the new controller. And again, this has no impact on performance. And then we put another new controller in. So we're literally swapping the components one by one while the array is running with no impact on performance. End users won't notice it's happening. And then kind of, hey, presto, you're running on the latest, greatest technology. And we continue to do that every 3 years, as long as you're under a valid Evergreen Gold support contract.
Brilliant, thank you, Max. And we've had another question. How would Pure cope with a highly diverse environment with several different IT departments?
It depends what the IT departments are doing. I mean, several different IT departments. If you're talking about the users having access, then we can integrate that with Active Directory in terms of who's logging in. If you're talking about things like multi-tenancy, where you want to split the array up into different compartments, we don't actually do that at Pure, and that would actually affect the data reduction and would negate the benefits you get. But if you're talking different IT departments, as in one's looking after VDI, somebody else is looking after, you know, you may have an IT department that looks after end user compute, another IT department that looks after critical billing infrastructures, then again, the way that Pure works is that, you know, all of these infrastructures can be combined onto the Pure Array. This is the whole point of the way that we've designed it. So we have a variable block size at the back end. So some arrays have a fixed block size. So if you have an array that has an 8K block size, if your workload isn't 8K, then you have to tweak things, tune things, and it may not be suitable. The way that we work is that it doesn't matter what type of application you're running, because of the virtualized block size, which goes down to 512 bytes, it means that everything is suitable to run on Pure. In fact, we find that most customers run as much as they can on Pure to the point where they run out of capacity and then have to buy more capacity or go to a bigger model of array. And if they need to go to a bigger model of array, then that again is a true non-disruptive upgrade. We just swap the controllers as it's running.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And just to say as well, the person who asked the question has also followed up and just said multiple ADs and authentication stacks. So
multiple ADs, I'm pretty sure we can do that, and we can tie it into your SSO environment as well. So there is, you know, so there's the ability to configure LDAP AD, and then we can also do SSO logins as well. So I'm pretty sure we can do multiple ADs.
Brilliant, that's great, Max. Well, I'd just like to say, everyone, thank you for presenting today. If anyone does think of any other questions, then feel free to send those through to tell me more at bytes.co.uk. So I think we'll wrap it up there, and I hope everyone has a lovely bank holiday weekend. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.